We're going to take some time and talk about nonverbal communication. And if you remember back to the beginning of the class, we talked about how nonverbal communication is stronger and more believable than verbal communication. So somebody could say that they're fine, but their nonverbals are communicating that they're not, and we are more likely 2/3 of the time to believe the nonverbals over the verbals. So nonverbals are a combination, by definition, are a combination of words, gestures, clothing, facial expressions, everything but the voice and how you control your voice. So anything connected to your body and what you put on your body and what you do with your body, that's nonverbal. Why it matters is that they communicate feelings and attitudes, which often are a part of connotative meaning, which we talked about with verbal communication, and they also are more convincing than verbal messages. So nonverbals serve 6 really important functions, and these are not on your study guide, so you need to put these on additional notes and make sure you know these elements of communication that are communicated by nonverbals. So the first thing that a nonverbal can do is that it can repeat what is said verbally. So if someone says to you, you just need to first do this task, second do this task, and they start using their fingers to number off the tasks, they're repeating, first they hold up a number 1, second they hold up a number 2. So by holding up these fingers, they're repeating what they're saying verbally. So that's the first function of nonverbals. Sometimes nonverbal messages can too substitute for verbal ones. So if I have my mouth full and somebody's like, tell me about what happened to you today, and you hold up a finger to indicate, wait, pause, it's substituting for that. Or if someone's like, can you tell me what's wrong? And then they shake their head, right? They're, instead of being able to say no, they're shaking their head. So that nonverbal is substituting for a verbal message or verbal communication. A third way verbal and nonverbal messages can relate is complementing. So that means that as I'm saying a verbal message, I'm doing a nonverbal action. So I might be like, Annie made me so mad, and then I punch my fist into my hand. Or you say something like, I'm exhausted, and they roll their eyes, or something like that. So we're adding to the conversation and the communication with the nonverbal. We're making it complement what we're saying. We say no as we're shaking our head. We say yes as we're nodding. We roll our eyes as we say we're annoyed. We furrow our eyebrows when we talk about being frustrated. So we're complementing what we're saying verbally. Fourth, nonverbals can accent. So think about in verbal or written communication, we bold or underline or italicize or add an exclamation point. So to accent accent speech as we're talking, we can raise our hands, or we can say, and I was so excited, and we put our hands out big, or we can say, and then I told him, no way, and we draw a line with our hand, a sort of a slashing gesture, right? So it's different than complimenting, because complimenting, it's a part of the whole gesture, but with accents, we're usually focusing in on one word. So we're putting our emphasis with our tone and our pitch, or we're making a gesture as we say one particular word, or we pause after a word and to add emphasis to that word. So think of the accenting as like an underline or an italics, or something like that. And I just noticed that functions is spelled wrong. There you go. The other thing it can do is regulate. So if someone's like, hey, slow down, and they lift their hands up, and it's slowing the speech down. Or if they're like, you need to stop, and they hold out their hand in a stop gesture. So it can regulate verbal behavior. Or someone can say, you need to be quiet, shh, right? And they make that symbol that can regulate verbal behavior. The last thing, and probably the most important, is that nonverbals can contradict. So this is the one that is more believable when we hear that nonverbals, if someone's like, no, I'm not angry, and their face is red and their veins are bulging, right? It's a double message. They're contradicting what they're saying verbally with their nonverbals. And like we've learned before, we are more likely to believe those contradictions, to believe those nonverbals, than we are to believe the verbals. So just to review, the 6 things that nonverbal messages can do, the 6 functions: repeat, substitute, complement, regulate, and contradict. So in addition to the 6 functions of nonverbals, you also have the way that you manage your voice. And so what you say is verbal communication, but how you say it and how you manipulate the tone, the pitch, the volume, the rate of speech and silence, vocaletics is also a form of nonverbal communication. So there's a lot of things that your voice, a lot of information that your voice provides or communicates. You have emotions, thoughts, the relationship you have with others, your self-confidence, your knowledge, how you're perceived by others, all of that comes through your voice. And we spend a lot of time talking about, different types of manipulations of the voice. There's a video that I'm going to play that shows a clip from Morgan Freeman. Let's see if we can get the sound to work. It's going to talk about his voice.
You're obviously famous for having a very good voice, but Morgan Freeman is in this.
That's the voice of God, baby.
In this changing world, it's harder than ever to find something extraordinary.
My voice ain't like that.
One thing I can tell you, if you're looking to improve the sound of your voice, yawn a lot.
Yawn a lot?
Yawn a lot. Yeah.
Why? Tell me why.
It relaxes your throat muscles. It relaxes your vocal cords. And as soon as they relax, the tone drops. The lower your voice is, the better you sound.
So if I yawned a lot,
yes,
I might start sounding like Morgan Freeman?
No, but you would certainly get a deeper voice. But every once in a while, a symbol of hope breaks through.
Were you annoyed that he got the trailer voiceover and you didn't?
Man, look, I've done voiceover work. It's Morgan Freeman, man. Like, what are you gonna do? Take it, bro. I can't compete with that.
Do you ever talk just to hear the sound of your own voice?
If you're talking just to hear the sound of your own voice, you don't have anything really to say.
Have you got a Morgan Freeman impression?
If you see Harry, ask him, because he's got a really good one.
No, I don't. I would try to, but it's terrible. I would always go Vsauce like that. It's terrible.
So what Morgan Freeman's voice shows us is that some voices are more memorable than others, and they have a certain resonance and tone that communicates a lot. There's actually been a lot of experiments about voice and the deepness of his voice and other men's voices. They say they've done some work at the University of Miami, and they wanted to know how voice impacts decisions. And they say in scientific experiments, people consistently perceive low-pitched voices in men as stronger and more physically attractive than male voices with a higher pitch. And so why we maybe find Morgan Freeman's voice memorable is because it really resonates and conveys this sort of strength and attractiveness that we identify with lower voices. He even found in this study that voice can influence who we trust and who we elect. They recorded men and women saying, "I urge you to vote for me this November," and they digitally raised and lowered the pitch of the recording, and across the board, men and women in the experiment voted for the deeper versions of both the men and the women. And we get the impression, the nonverbal that's communicated is that lower pitched individuals have more integrity, competence, and physical power. That's a lot that's communicated by voice and by the way we change our pitch and tone. And that's all nonverbal communication. When it comes to voice, the way that you emphasize words also conveys meaning. And sometimes you don't realize that by changing your emphasis, you're changing the meaning. I can take the same sentence and say it 4 different ways, and that sentence can sound different in terms of meaning. So if I say, this is a fantastic communication book, I'm really emphasizing this one book in particular. If I say, this is a fantastic communication book, I'm emphasizing the adjective, the descriptor. If I say, this is a fantastic communication book, I'm emphasizing the type of book it is, or this is a fantastic communication book. I'm putting the emphasis on the book. So where we put our emphasis and where we pause and it's called punching, where we sort of punch the word a little bit, really impacts the meaning and the nonverbals that we're communicating. And that's all called vocaletics. It's all a part of vocaletics. Gestures are another form of nonverbal that is pretty important when communicating meaning. There are 5 types of gestures that we use, or 5 categories of gestures that are used. We have emblems. This is a really symbolic gesture. These are cultural or specific communication gestures. Like flipping someone off is an emblem. It's a sign. It's a symbol of a derogatory meaning. The Hitler sign, like the making the Heil Hitler sign, has a lot of emblematic message behind it. So sort of a powerful gesture. Illustrators, these are gestures that complement or enhance or substitute what we're saying. So we talked about sort of the meanings of what nonverbals can do. These types of gestures will do that. So we can think about those 6 meanings of nonverbals, and often they're illustrators, right? We're complementing something with our hands, or enhancing our surprise by raising our eyebrows, or substituting the nodding of the head for yes. So those are illustrators. Affect displays are gestures that communicate emotion, like when we put our head down, or we put our hand out, or when we put our hand on our heart, like we're feeling something, right? We're having gestures that are communicating that you're feeling something, or there's emotion. Regulators, we talked about those in our 6 functions of nonverbals. And adapters are actually really interesting. These are almost subconscious gestures that we do when we're uncomfortable or nervous. So you may not know that you have adaptive gestures. Like maybe when you get really nervous, you play with your fingers, or you put your hair behind your ear, or you rub your neck. And until someone really points that out to you, you may not realize that you're using those adapting gestures to help compensate for the nerves that you feel, and that can be almost subconscious. Our body sort of responding to that. So another form of nonverbal. A really interesting one is called proxemics, and this is how we measure the space around us, and this is also nonverbal. So they've sort of measured out the space and how we measure the space around us. So there are 4 zones that you manage nonverbally. You have the public zone, so how you deal with people who are over 12 feet away, right? If you're in a public place, how you space that out. Social zone means that you're allowing people to be closer to you, like in a social setting, a party, enclosed spaces, a concert, things like that. Your personal and intimate zone, how people manage that space is really important. Like people who are 18 inches away from you up to 4 feet, who do you allow in that space? And what does it take to allow people in that space? And then of course the intimate zone is really close, right? Who's allowed in those spaces? You watched the TED Talk last time about how nonverbals shape who we are, and that's called kinesthetics, right? Our posture, our gestures, how we hold ourselves, are all an important part of nonverbals and communicate different messages. There's lots of other forms, ones that we won't necessarily spend a lot of time on, but are important to note. Territoriality, which is how you control and use your space, like your personal space, so your bedroom, your home, right? How that space is organized, what that communicates about you. Chromatics is how time relates to communication. So like how you control time and manage your time often is part of nonverbal communication. Emojis, right? That's become a huge nonverbal communication that accents verbal communication. Haptics is the study of touch, right? How do you touch and are touched by others? And that's kind of connected to proxemics and space. And then also physical appearance. Think about the way that your clothing and the way you manage yourself communicates a message. Hygiene, if you're wearing, I mean, we all know the stereotypes of different types of people who wear different types of clothing, right? And what they communicate about themselves if they, are wanting to have dyed hair or dark clothes or cowboy boots, right? Things like that. We really use clothing to communicate messages about us. One of the most important is eye behavior and eye contact, and how with eyes we really have learned to recognize and see what people are communicating with their eyes. So I'm going to have you take an eye quiz. Up at the front of the room is the New York Times eye behavior quiz, and you're going to look at 27 pairs of eyes and see if you can detect what emotion they're conveying, because we're pretty good at understanding eye behavior and what emotions are coming through in the eyes. And that's sort of our last form of nonverbals to look at. So grab that eye quiz from the front of the room, and we'll correct it as a class at the end of the class period.